This is the Final Word Daily from day one, day zero, the only day there will ever be of the fifth test at Old Trafford between England and India. Geoff Lemon with you, Adam Collins with me. The first thing we've got to do is sum up the day in 30 seconds or less.
Yes, let's have a crack at that. At about 7:15 this morning, I got a text message saying there's not going to be any cricket today. Then we thought there might be a test that starts on Saturday, maybe even Sunday, but negotiations between the BCCI and the ECB were fruitless, and at 9 o'clock local time, it was formally called off. There will be no test match. Originally, it was going to be declared a forfeit, according to the statement that was quickly revised. It's just simply no test to be played, which means the series ends with India winning 2-1, and we're just deflated and distressed about the fact that it's come to this, but here we are.
Talk about anticlimaxes. I remember 2013 when England retained the Ashes after the match got washed out at Old Trafford, coincidentally, on the last day. Australia in a winning position. You know, rain, didn't get back on. The sun was out and shining by 7 p.m, but it was like, oh, that's a pretty shit way to retain a trophy. It's not a great way to win a series, is it? When it could have been squared up. We've seen this series has been pretty erratic. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people who'll say, oh, India would have won the last test anyway, but it may be a good chance it would have been rained off, or there wouldn't have been enough play to get a result. But it's still not going to sit right that, yeah, it's 2-1, but there was a test that was supposed to be played.
Yeah, that's right. And look, there's loads to unpack here, so my 30-second summary doesn't even start to do it justice. But from a purely what's happening in the 22 yards that matter most perspective, yeah, it's been a volatile series. England might have squared it 2-2. India would have walked away still having, retained the trophy, so to speak, even though they play for a different trophy in India and England, so it's not exactly linear relative to what happened earlier this year. But still, it would have been a considerable achievement going 2-1 up and then drawing the final test if it played out that way, or losing it. It wouldn't have taken the gloss off what they did in London, both at Lord's and at the Oval last week. So there's that. And then there's all that's gone on. I'm sure much of this will be sleuthed out by the various news reporters in days to come and weeks to come. But yeah, after Ravi Shastri it was declared a positive case, I think there was always a risk the whole thing could blow up. In hindsight, the fact that play continued on day 4 last week does look a little bit at odds with what we've seen around England at professional level, county cricket, over the last couple of years. When there's been a positive case, the game's been called off, but none of us wanted to say that last week. And look, we're guilty of that too, because we didn't want that test match to end on the 4th morning. It was a belting test match. We wanted it to reach its natural conclusion, and we're all desperately glad that it did, knowing now that Manchester won't be proceeding. So, but as soon as that happened, there was that inflection point, there was always this risk of happening. And the fact that the second physio, by reports, has contracted COVID, who's worked on a number of India's senior players who are in the Test 11, the incubation period with COVID-19 being as long as it is, there was a risk, even with a number of PCR tests that have been done in the last 48 hours, that an Indian player in the 11 could subsequently get COVID, and then all hell would break loose. So I think they've made the decision to get ahead of it and pull out before that kind of scenario might have ended the tour in an even more shambolic situation than today is.
It's been a strange couple of hours trying to keep track of all the strands. I know you've been making calls and trying to work out what's going on. One of the questions that would come up is, if all of the players are double vaccinated, as I understand them to be, what are they worried about? Like, even if it were passed around within the playing 11, like, would that necessarily have been that part of it seems a bit confusing to understand.
Yeah, and there's a pretty good answer to that as well. It's that they need to leave the country to get to the IPL, and they can't leave the country if you test positive for COVID in the UK, if you're infected. So let's say a player in the Indian team was infected with COVID-19, say 2 days from now, 3 days from now, they wouldn't be able to leave for 10 subsequent days, which means they'd miss even more of the IPL, which is the cricket consideration, but there's obviously a human consideration there as well, that the idea of leaving a teammate behind after what's been a very long tour where they've had to jump through a lot of hoops wouldn't be ideal. So yes, you can look at it purely through the prism of the coincidence that the IPL starts in 10 days, the fact that the BCCI would have been very happy for this test match not to have been played at all. Going back to May, I think it was, there were reports that they were keen to turn it into a 4-test series as soon as they announced the new IPL schedule to start as it is, just a couple of weeks on from where we are today. So yeah, it's a coincidence, but yeah, there is a human consideration here as well, that if one of the players does come down with COVID, whilst they're still in the UK, then they won't be able to leave. So I'm sure that was all part of it.
And another part of it being that some of the players have families with them. I think Rohit Sharma does. Cheteshwar Pujara has kids along with them and so on, which would also be a consideration. This is going to be fraught. I have a feeling the next couple of days there are going to be a lot of recriminations, a lot of accusations and counter-accusations from one side to another about whose fault it is and who did what wrong. I'm sure we'll hear a lot of people pointing to the fact that England bailed on their tour of South Africa and that Australia pulled out of their tour of South Africa as well on the grounds that there was COVID-19 going around. It does seem like a contradiction when you look at the incredible explosion of the virus in India and the fact that the IPL tried to proceed and then had to be shut down after it got into those teams, and the fact that this test is being called off. But it seems to me that the key point is that second physio that you talked about. So during the fourth test match, they were able to isolate Baradharan and Ravi Shastri, the staff who had positive tests, who hadn't necessarily had that much crossover contact with the players in those key few days, that meant that there was a reasonable chance the players might get out of it unscathed. The fact that there's the second staff member who has been having a fair bit of contact with some of those players does mean that, as you say, there was a reasonable chance of a positive test coming in on day 2 or something like that. And I suppose it's a toss of a coin as to whether that would be worse, whether it would be worse to start the match and then have it not able to reach a conclusion rather than getting out on day 1. But cancelling it a couple of hours before play, there are a lot of people who have been screwed over, who are travelling across England trying to get to that test match and have been told halfway through their journeys that they could have turned around. You do wonder, could they not at least have made this decision last night?
And look, the BCCI shut up shop last night. We didn't get any communication about what was going to happen, no confirmation a test would take place. So I suppose when we woke up this morning, there was always a chance of this. You're right about sort of picking your poison. Do you start the test on the risk that a player will get COVID and then you call it off after 2 days? I mean, that's where it gets really murky. So maybe the proactive decision will be seen as a good one if a player does come down with it. We know the exponential nature not only of COVID but of this particular Delta variant, which has been such a pest in recent months. There's going to be a lot of scrutiny. You talk about recriminations. There is going to be a lot of scrutiny over this book launch last week in London, where the coach Ravi Shastri was launching a new book. A number of players were there, including the captain Kohli. Lots of social media activity. There's a lot of grey area about what's safe living, which were the conditions in which England have been participating in this series. India and England have both been living in what they're calling safe living. So not a bubble, but there's an understanding that you will conduct yourself in a certain way. I'm certain that the microscope will be over the top of, interacting with members of the public outside of the bubble when there's tons of Delta around. Does that tick that box? I'm not so sure. I mean, the very fact that Josh Butler went in and out of the system, other players have done likewise. I'm not saying it's exclusively an India thing, but the fact that there is photographic evidence of them being at a book launch last week, it just doesn't look good. It's bad optics, I suppose, given that it was the coach who picked it up first and now it's gone through other members of the support staff and potentially members of the playing group as well. That's unclear at this stage, even though I do stress that the entire playing group have now recorded 2 negative tests in the last 24 hours, and hopefully they all get on the plane without picking up a positive, because they'll be stuck here if that were the case. And Geoff, you talk about the broader implications. Yep, it's the fans, it's the north of England, this being a set-piece test match. Old Trafford don't have a test match next year. That's already been announced. It's the 21,000 people who are heading along today and in subsequent days. It's the Lancashire County Cricket Club. They copped a battering last year, as did all clubs around the country, but especially the bigger clubs with corporate facilities. They lost so much of their revenue, which couldn't be replaced. So this takes a sledgehammer to the revenue of a club like Lancashire as well. So there are far broader implications which are difficult to reconcile, but again, we're in a situation where there's not an awful lot that we can do. And I suppose another way of looking at this is that it's a surprise that we haven't had that happen yet. We had 6 test matches here in biosecure conditions last year in the bubble, which was never breached, apart from a couple of outside of the playing group small breaches, but it never got to the playing in a bubble. And we had a World Test Championship final down at the Rose Bowl, and we've had 4 Test matches between England and India. We've had a women's Test, albeit not played under the same conditions, but still, there's been a lot of cricket played here, and they've managed to get through unscathed until what might end up being the very final hurdle before things might return to normal here in terms of what's possible in the summer of 2022.
There are a few things to try to write together here, and I think I would be pretty confident in saying that you can't really blame India for calling off the Test match because of the threat of it spreading through the 11, as we've talked about. The fact that it got to such a late stage is more of a problem. There will be a lot of argument about whether it should have been a forfeit or whether it should have been called off, and what the scoreline should be. It would be an extremely hollow feeling for England to be told you've drawn the series 2-2 when the last match was a forfeit. That's not going to mean that they didn't get absolutely bashed around in the previous Test match at Lords and so on.
Agreed.
But it equally feels pretty hollow to say, hooray, congratulations, yay, # Team India, you won a series 2-1 when you didn't play the last match. It made it very easy, I reckon, for the BCCI to decide to call off this test because they were already leading in the series. That certainly would have made the decision a much simpler one for them to make. There was no benefit. If they were locked at 1-1, it might have been a different story. But I think, so in terms of blame and recrimination, I think a lot of it's going to come back to that book launch because, look, maybe you can't detective work prove that that's where it came from, but it seems pretty freaking likely that that's where it came from. If you're out there kissing babies and shaking hands and taking photos with a couple of hundred people who've all come, we've seen the videos of the event. It's a crowded room full of people, and why would you do that? I mean, the BCCI was shitty about this a few days ago with Ravi Shastri and the players. They were sending them notes asking for explanations about why this had happened. It was obviously not the sort of thing that was supposed to happen. Yes, it was legal, but there was an expectation that players are supposed to conduct themselves with due caution because the financial ramifications for this kind of thing are massive. So to have the coach of the team decide to put himself out there, that is just insanity to me. That is incredible arrogance to say that my event, this thing, it's all about me. I've got a book with me on the front and I want to put it out, and that's what matters, not trying to take care of my players, not taking care of my staff, not taking care of the series that I'm playing in. That's an abrogation of responsibility, and I think he should be absolutely smashed up for that, and if he were, rightly so, but I doubt there'll be any punishment coming from the BCCI because they'd rather save face.
Yeah, look, there'll be a big fat please explain landing on his desk. As you say, there kind of already is one, but it'll expand from there based on the damage that we've already articulated. The financial implications of this are huge, massive. And if it all does come back to that, if they can trace it back to that, it'll be even more the case. I lived in the bubble for a few weeks last year, and I can give you my first-hand experience of the riot act that was read to us on the way in. It was made very clear that if you stuffed up and your personal behaviour was the catalyst for them having to shut down the entire series, that you would wear that and you'd own that. All these livelihoods that would be at risk if you chose to put your own personal behaviour ahead of that of the collective. And look, there's been a lot of that through COVID more broadly in the community about needing to put other people ahead of your own interests. And I know when we were briefed going in there, that was crystal clear. Do not do anything that could put at jeopardy the series going ahead. And if that's the standard, and look, I've got other friends who've been living in safe quarters this year, safe living, sorry. So not the bubble, but I draw a distinction here. It's not a bubble this year, but it is a level below that, and everyone's been double jabbed, and everyone's done their quarantine, and they are permitted to live a life in England, no question. But there are levels. And I've got friends who've been doing safe living who have not done anything. They've not seen family, they've not seen friends, they've been living in a quasi-bubble for weeks or months at different times. County cricket is much the same. So, yes, it isn't without precedent that cricketers around this country have put the greater good first to keep the show on the road, and now the show is off. And the fact that there is a very obvious example of where safe living wasn't adhered to, clearly, I think, as you say, Geoff, a lot of scrutiny will fall there, and that will be the nature of the reporting over the next couple of days. And what comes from that, I mean, you're right, of course, nothing will happen. In practice, nothing will happen, because that's just the way that world cricket works. However, that shouldn't deny the Fourth Estate from doing its job and digging out all the facts and holding it to scrutiny.
Yeah, it's a very disappointing end to what has been an extraordinary series, and I think that's the thing that really bites is, we've been so excited about the standard of the cricket over the last few weeks. I'm sure we'll get some angry people who think that they're patriots getting mad about defending the national team coach, that how dare you criticise and so on. We've been thrilled by the cricket that we've seen. We've revelled in getting to watch this team produce a couple of outstanding performances, but to see some incredibly poor judgment and incredibly selfish behaviour off the field potentially be the catalyst for ruining that. Like, it's just really puts a pall on this series, on something that we should have looked back on and celebrated, and we will to an extent, but there'll always be that asterisk next to it that it got screwed up at the end.
Yeah, I agree. It's been some wonderful cricket. I'll look back on this as one of the great series that I've been involved in. It's been an absolute joy to broadcast it on radio and to be part of what we're doing here on The Final Word each night with everyone on YouTube and all the comments, and we've loved all of that. This isn't some attack on India. I don't want the comments, and sometimes it's the way it goes. You're critical of the Indian team, it becomes an attack on India. It's not. We love the Indian cricket team and the way they go about it. We revel in the way they play the game, the 2021 they're having. This isn't about that. It's about identifying where something's gone horribly wrong. And yes, COVID is pernicious, and COVID ignores boundaries and borders and all the rest of it. And the decision that India have taken today seems a prudent one based on the evidence that we've got in front of us at the moment, based on the information that's been supplied to us, however scant, albeit. But there is a level of culpability here, which, as I say, will be investigated in the fullness of time. But yeah, let's keep it nice in the comments. We're not having a go at your country. We're simply saying that this was a pretty bad look.
Yep. So that brings us, sadly, to the end of the Final Word dailies for this test match. We were looking forward to doing them over the next few days. Probably would have been a fair bit of describing the rain and not necessarily a whole lot of cricket. But let's keep an eye on what actually happens with the weather over the next few days to see whether we would have got a test match. But I imagine the Final Word daily will be back for the T20 World Cup when that starts up. And we've also got our weekly show, which comes out in the middle of the week. We've got our history show on the weekends, so keep an eye on the feed. Thanks heaps to everyone who's jumped on and subscribed and watched over the last few weeks. It's been a hell of a ride for us. We've enjoyed it greatly. Enjoyed getting to know people in the comments and hanging out with everybody online and being able to tell you about the game, particularly when you haven't had time to watch it. We've loved your company wherever you're tuning in from around the world. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to add to that, it's been a real joy meeting all sorts of new people below the line in the comments and finding what we do more generally. If you're new to Final Word Land, we make 2 programs a week when it's not a test match. That's our weekly show around the issues in cricket, often a lot of long-form interviews with some of the biggest names in the game. And our weekend show, which is about the history of cricket, which is a bit of an indulgence really, but seemingly one that people quite enjoy. So stick around, stay a while. We'll post all of those episodes on YouTube, but the best way to find us and listen to us is on the podcast feed, so pick that up in the usual way. And if you really like what we're doing, you can help support it on Patreon, patreon.com/The Final Word. We've got in excess of 600 people who have been kindly contributing to what Geoff and I have been doing over the last few years and allowing us to really invest as much of ourselves in this podcast as we can, both the audio version and now on YouTube as well. So thanks for being part of that ride, and yeah, can't wait to do it all again soon. You're right, Geoff, the T20 World Cup starts in, what is it, a month and a bit, maybe 5 or 6 weeks. So we will certainly be back with the dailies for that, and between times our weekly and weekend episodes. Better say goodbye, Geoff. It's been the Final Word Daily. Adam Collins and Geoff Lemon. Let's do it again sometime.
I wish it could have ended on a better note, but look, this is the way the world works. We'll see you next time.
Bye.